Hi guys, welcome to Legal Research 1, a short instructional video on researching regulations online. And I know that you're watching this video because you have chosen to do the week 7 content on your own time as opposed to in-class time. And of course, this was created this way, this week's content, to allow for some flexibility around the family day holiday on Monday, so that all first-year students had the ability to either come to one of the 2 lab sections, even if it wasn't your regularly scheduled one, or watch some of the content online, review the slides online, and do the in-process online. As a reminder, if you're doing it this way, you are missing out on the ability for me to check your work in class, obviously. So you do remain responsible for that. So if you're having trouble with regulations after watching this video and after looking at the PowerPoint slides, I would remind you that we will not be revisiting it again in class. And so you are responsible for looking at the textbook where it covers researching regulations or reviewing those slides again. Of course, I'm always available for questions that you have, but we won't be doing a full class instruction on it, right? The other thing I need to remind you of is the assignment 3, researching statutes and regulations, which is worth 10% of your mark, comes out this week. So if you're not in class to get the hard copy of that, you'll need to pick up a copy of it outside of my office in my box that says my name on it, and it will be there all week for you to pick up. And that assignment is due at the start of your regularly scheduled lab class in week 8. So the first week in March, the week that we return from reading week. On to the fun world of regulations. So the first thing I want to remind you of is that regulations are considered secondary or subordinate legislation. Of course, they are created pursuant to an already existing piece of legislation or statute. So there has to be a statute that either the House of Commons or the Legislative Assembly in Ontario has already passed. They've created that statute, and somewhere within that statute, one of the provisions allow for the creation of regulations, okay? Regulations are important, and they need to be read in conjunction with the statute that you're working with because they flesh it out. They give it a bit more detail. The statute is like the bare bones of the law in that area, and the regulations will give a bit more meat to what some aspect of the law says. So for example, sometimes a statute will say a tribunal has the ability to create fees or set fees for certain applications. And you may find those fees not actually outlined in the statute itself, but in one of the provisions of the regulations. There's many other examples of how regulations flesh out sort of the bare bones of that statute. So just be aware of that as you're dealing with any new area of law, to be familiar with the regulations as well. And there could be a number of regulations made pursuant to one statute. Oftentimes there is a general regulation, so it covers a whole lot of stuff that is linked to that statute, and then sometimes there'll be a more specific topic of regulations, and in fact, I'll point you to one of those today for your online searching. The second thing I wanted to point out about regulations is that they are made in a way that they can be easily amended. So for example, if fees or payments to an individual have to be made according to a schedule in the regulations, regulations do not need to go through the formal amending process in either the Legislative Assembly or the House of Commons. Regulations are not drafted by the members that sit in either of those houses. In fact, regulations are drafted by bureaucrats, ministry workers, government workers, who that is their job day in and day out for years, just working in that specific area of the law. So they have a lot more detail about that, those little intricacies that need to flow out of those regulations better than the legislators actually could. So the statute is drafted by the members in the House of Commons or the Legislative Assembly. The regulations are drafted by government workers, okay? And so because of that, they don't need to go through the strict amending process anytime a law needs to be amended. They can just be redrafted and republished based on the government office or the ministry that they're coming out of. So it makes it really easy to make changes. So that's kind of a nice thing. Having said that, they do very much read like statutes or its primary source legislation reads, okay? So it does look very similar to a statute, and the wording that's used and the layout of it is almost identical. So you might have had some, I guess, opportunity to look at a regulation already. Certainly you will have in your tribunal course, and I'm sure you might have in a few others. So you'll know what I'm saying when I refer to the fact that they look very similar. Okay, so the first place I want you to go today is to look up the Maintenance Standards Regulation number 517-06, made pursuant to the Residential Tenancies Act, okay, in Ontario. So there's a few different websites that you should have open. First, I want you to pull up e-laws. I also want you to have CanLII open, and then Justice Laws, which is the federal one, remember. So of course, you can also search federal law on CanLII. That is true. Today, I'm just going to walk you through the Residential Tenancies Act Maintenance Standard Regulation on CanLII, so not the federal aspect of it. And we're going to turn to Justice Laws to look at a federal regulation. So you should have up these 3 free internet sources to find, to do legal research and to find regulations: e-laws, CanLII, Justice Laws. Okay. So on e-laws, there's a couple of places that you can access the regulations. In fact, on all of the databases, there are a couple of places to access the regulation. So first on CanLII, remember we're looking at the Residential Tenancies Act, the maintenance standard. So you can either look it up. Did I say CanLII or e-laws? I don't remember. E-laws. I'm sorry if I messed that up. So first you can look it up either at statute or by looking under regulations themselves. Okay? So the first place I want you to go, let me just arrange my notes here so I can actually see them a little bit better. The left-hand side of the screen that you're on in e-laws, there'll be a little filter box. You'll be familiar with this because when we were looking at statute in e-laws, we actually went to this section, okay? So where there's a little filter box, if you could on the drop-down menu, choose regulations there. That's on the left-hand side of your screen. So put regulations in, not statutes, in that drop-down menu. And then where the little letters show above, the alphabet letters, just above that, if you could click on R for the governing statute residential tenancy. So in e-laws, we're going to look under the governing statute name. Okay, and that's important because we come back to that later. There is a distinction. So once you click on R, the statutes will list themselves accordingly, alphabetically, and all you need to do is go straight down to the statute name, the Residential Tenancies Act, right? And pull that up. Once you pull it up on e-laws, the statute name, you'll see there's a little tab at the top that says regulations. And so you can link to the regulations right directly to the statute. And this is useful because you might not know the name of a statute, or sorry, the name of a regulation, but you know the name of the statute. So this allows you to pull up the regulation you need just by going to the primary source, the legislation that created it, right? Really useful. Also on e-laws, so I want you to reset your search, and you can find that little reset button over where that filter box was on the left-hand side of your screen. So if you click reset, and you're going to come back to sort of the main search page, and that little drop-down menu that you plugged regulations into before is now going to allow you to search by statute. Okay, so you can also search by statute and pull up the Residential Tenancies Act by its name. You click on that, you'll find the regulations that are linked to it in a little tab, and you'll be familiar with that. The way we did it first was to put the Residential Tenancies Act by regulation. And so it lists all the regulations for you that way, right? So on e-laws, you search either by the regulation tab or by the statute tab by the name of the enabling legislation. In this case, the Residential Tenancies Act, okay? And that will take you to the regulations that you need. Let's flip over to CanLII, because CanLII is a little bit different. Again, let me rearrange my notes here. So on the CanLII main page, you'll see